I would be held down by 4 men at a time and they'd inject me with sedatives.
I was force-fed and tied up.
I was sexually abused.
A psychiatric ward is meant to be a safe place for patients while they receive treatment. But this wasn't the case for these women. Aimee went through a mental health crisis after experiencing a loss.
When I was just hitting teens, just before, I lost a parent. In my final year of high school, I got very stressed. I was bullied. I just found it really difficult getting out of bed, getting dressed. I would neglect myself, so I wasn't eating. It got to the point where I ended up being hospitalized, not eating, not drinking.
It got to the point where she needed urgent help.
I was checked into a psych ward for borderline personality disorder and anorexia.
They took me in and decided I should be sectioned, which is where you're put under the Mental Health Act. It's a legal protection that you're now under their care. I was first diagnosed when I got there with anorexia nervosa. Then they thought there were maybe deeper meanings. They gave me emerging unstable personality disorder, which later in adulthood turned to BPD, borderline personality disorder.
Borderline personality disorder impacts your relationship with yourself and others in ways that negatively affects how you function in everyday life. Part of being sectioned includes having no say in your own treatment. For Aimee, this had horrible consequences.
This was my first experience of being on a psychiatric unit. I was just doing what I was told. I was scared. I was on nasogastric feeding, which is when they force feed you through a tube. It's all done under restraint and it's quite traumatizing. And that was kind of the start of a long line of traumatic moments. I was in a feed and I was put on a whole day's food in one feed. Obviously, that's too much for a stomach. So I would throw up. And this one nurse just kind of went, "We'll do it again then." So did it straight away. I threw up again and the tube came out of my mouth. She put her finger, shoved it into my mouth, didn't check it was in the right place, and just put the feed in again. It all came up through my throat and I just was constantly vomiting, and she kept going. So the whole time I was saying stop, no, and it was no one was listening to me. There were 5 people in the room and they just let that happen.
Aimee's abuse didn't end there.
I was stripped and changed with men holding me. In that moment I felt violated. I was terrified because I was anything could happen. I don't know why they're doing this because I wasn't really that high of a risk. I was in a really dark place. I wasn't talking. I was sent to my room. I wasn't allowed out and I wasn't allowed access to things like therapy or education. And also, they didn't even bother offering me food anymore. I was at the point where I actually asked for breakfast. When I got it, I was scared, but I tried. They took it away because I was taking too long.
Aimee finally got out, but she still lives with the trauma.
I was in hospital for 2 years.
I was meant to be helped.
It's quite traumatizing.
Neve was also admitted to a psychiatric hospital for disordered eating and self-harm.
I struggle with issues with my body image. I saw myself as overweight. I was just restricting. No one could change what I thought about myself. So it got to the point where I was getting dangerously ill physically. I started to develop symptoms like self-harm and emotional dysregulation. I'd act out in the form of self-harm and suicide attempts. I would restrict my eating quite a lot to the point where I'd be eating maybe an apple a day. I was very thin and very unwell. And I was admitted to the eating disorder unit in Maidenhead when I was about 15.
Despite the homely experience when she first arrived, Neve quickly realised that the care was far from adequate.
patients would be left to self-harm and even try and end their own lives. There were several instances I would be left to make myself sick. I would eat a meal and then I would force myself to be sick. They'd just sort of give me a sick bowl, send me to my room. Patients, and myself included, would be hitting their heads against the wall as a form of self-harm. They sort of disregard you as if you were sort of attention seeking. Blood would be left on the walls. A lot of us patients were under a section, which means that for a certain period of time we were detained under the Mental Health Act, which was decided by mental health professionals, that we could not make decisions for ourselves, meaning that they could do whatever they wanted to me to try and stop me from hurting myself. I was locked in, I had no freedom, I had no say in my treatment.
Neve felt at a complete loss.
I would often call my family. My mum had to watch me be restrained by 4 men. There was nothing she could do because I was under this mental health section. She had next to no input in my care and my treatment. I would often use my nails to sort of scratch on my arm. But if they came in and found me doing that, the first sort of thing they would do, put me into a restraint. I would be held down and they'd inject me with sedatives to make me calm down. This was often more harm than good. And I was self-harming and trying to end my own life because I didn't want to be around anymore. If someone had just spoken to me and tried to calm me down, I would have come out of the situation a lot better. I was discharged in March 2016. I was transferred back to Maidenhead, where I was treated there for another 9 months, and I was discharged February 2017.
This experience has had long-lasting effects on Neve.
I sort of blame myself that I deserved it because that was the norm. Oh, everyone's experiencing it. It's not just me. This is completely normal. Now I've come to realise that no, it's not normal at all. This experience has really affected my life, even to this day. I feel really let down by the system. I get quite anxious and feel quite low about the things I went through. I still receive counselling nowadays, even though it's been 5 years.
Aimee also suffered abuse whilst admitted to a mental hospital as a teen.
I didn't know what was happening to me was wrong until it happened to my friend. I was sexually abused under the care of a psychiatric ward. I started struggling with my mental health when I was about 10, and it got noticed when I was 12. And then I started with professional help. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. My treatment included talking therapy and medication. I was sent to the acute ward the first time for just being really suicidal, being really low. They didn't know how to manage me in the community anymore. I was admitted first at the end of 2019. An acute ward is typically a short stay mental health unit for those experiencing an acute crisis in their mental health.
While inside, Aimee started to experience abuse in the form of sexual assault.
The staff member and I always got on really well. He'd make comments quite often about my body, my appearance. He'd tell me about dreams he supposedly had that I was in. He'd always make comments or touch me in areas I wasn't comfortable with, or kiss me on the forehead, cheek. And then one day he went right to kiss me, and that took me by surprise so much that I turned around and slapped him. It became apparent I wasn't up for anything physical, intimate, and he moved on to another patient, a friend of mine, and did the same kind of thing with her. And then she came back one day and told the staff member, so they reported it. The assault really impacted my mental health because the two of us, myself and the other patient, we both gave statements to the police, so it became a police investigation, and it just was constantly on my mind because I'd be constantly being contacted by police.
The case eventually went to trial.
January 2023, he faced trial for 8 counts of sexual abuse, and he was found guilty of all 8 counts. I was readmitted to the same acute ward because it's the only adult acute ward on my island. He obviously wasn't working there anymore, but the place still held a lot of bad memories. To cope with what happened to me, I began to just continuously binge eat everything until I put on a lot of weight. I'm just starting treatment at my new hospital and I'm hopeful that it will work here. They seem like they have a solid plan in place.
Aimee, Neve and Aimee all experienced abuse while they were at their most vulnerable. Incredibly, they have been able to overcome a lot of trauma.
I can now have a lot of independence, which I never thought I'd have maybe like 6 months ago. At the moment, I'm doing pretty well. Being out of hospital has given me this whole new outlook on life. I was screaming into a void for so long. I want to give people like me who were just shouting and not being heard a voice.
This experience has really affected my life even to this day. I want other people to know that this is going on and people aren't getting the help they need.
I'm sharing my story because it's really something no one should have to go through whilst being in a psychiatric unit, and I just want to encourage people to speak up. I am seen. Are you?